Welcome to the Resist Average Academy, your source for inspiring stories, lessons, and action steps designed to level up every area of your life. Here's your host, Tommy Baker.
Academy Nation, welcome back to another video podcast here on YouTube. Today's guest is going to absolutely blow your mind. More about him in a moment. I want to say welcome. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to comment. We're doing a lot more of the podcast. The podcast mission is simple: to equip you with the wisdom and the perspective to make practical change and growth towards your vision and living a life of intense, incredible achievement, but also deep-rooted fulfillment. That's exactly what we're here for. By the way, I want to remind you that if you're lacking clarity right now during this time, if you have anxiety, which is, by the way, a completely human and normal experience, but staying there, that's a choice. That's agency. That's us choosing it day after day. If you're lacking clarity, if you're feeling stuck, maybe you are one of the people whose jobs got furloughed or minimized, or you're doing something new, I created the Resist Average Masterclass. You can find that at resistaverage.com/masterclass. This is an HD video like this one, HD audio workbook, 100% free, and it's the same content that clients come to Scottsdale, Arizona to train with me for, and you can get it free. All you have to do is go to resistaverageacademy.com/masterclass, put in your name, put in your email, and you can get access to that ASAP. You're going to get clarity, you're going to get a blueprint, and you're going to, most importantly, the biggest thing is you're going to release the overwhelm so you can allow the vision and the creation and the momentum to move forward. Okay, today's guest is a special one for me. By the way, we had a little bit of a video issue, so the first 5 to 10 minutes are cut off. It's unfortunate, but to me, it doesn't matter because the guest is incredible. He is none other than Robert Greene. I don't know if you've ever read this book, but he has written several New York Times bestsellers. This one has more highlights than it does actual content, which is pretty normal for that type of stuff. But Robert Greene is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of The 48 Laws of Power, 33 Strategies of War, Art of Seduction, Mastery, and The Laws of Human Nature. He also co-wrote a book with 50 Cent called The 50th Rule. To me, someone who's on a path of obsessive wisdom, of growth, of transformation, getting to spend an hour with Robert Greene is a dream, to be honest. So tap in. The audio was a little low. Hopefully we were able to fix it, but we did get video for you guys. I'll also include the podcast audio link only below, and I want to hear from you. What did you get from Robert Greene's conversation on your life's task, on apprenticeship, of leaning into the resistance, of living a fulfilling life, of creating mastery, and all the topics we covered. So Academy Nation, welcome to Robert Greene, to this video version of the podcast.
I've got to find a better backer. Already is communicating to people that you lack confidence in that idea. Then if it's like, I need to get a degree, I need a new skill, I'm telling you, you're going to learn more by doing it. One of the people I interviewed for Mastery was Paul Graham. Paul Graham is one of the most brilliant entrepreneurs. He started a company called Y Combinator. He sold for billions of dollars. Sam Altman is now the CEO. And Paul told me, basically, it was a school for teaching entrepreneurs. And he would receive thousands of applications every semester. They run like 2 a year or something like that, from everybody around the world, because he was so famous. And he said the people that were the least successful were the ones that had the big degrees from Harvard, from Yale, from all the best business schools. Those who were like just out of high school, who were hungry, who had an idea, he was looking for people who were hungry. So get over this idea that you need an MBA, that you need a degree, that you need to wait, that you're going to need to load yourself with more student debt, which is crippling so many young people nowadays. I mean, that's one thing where I have a lot of empathy for, because I didn't have it in my day. Sure. You're going to learn much more if business is what you're into. If you're an entrepreneur, you're going to learn 1,000 times more in actually starting up your business than in 12 years of business school. I remember, it's not analogous, but it's kind of is. I'm somebody who loves foreign languages. That was sort of one of my specialties in college. And I studied French for like 4 years. And then I went to Paris, and I couldn't speak a fucking word. All that I learned in college was, and in 3 weeks while I was there, there was like a French girl that I wanted to date. So I was really, motivated to learn quickly. I learned in 3 weeks and in 4 years. I learned by actually being there, by doing it, by being in the environment, by practicing it day after day after day. That's how the brain is optimized for learning.
So, and what you're saying there is what you mentioned in the book a lot and in the work that you do, is that being emotionally engaged is, because the next thing I was going to ask you, is it more important to have the perfect plan, or is it more important to be emotionally engaged in something that you just you almost can't not do it because it's so interesting to you?
Well, I'm always reminded of the Mike Tyson quote. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. So there is no such thing as a perfect plan, because you'll have your perfect plan and then you'll start it up and you get punched in the face. And then you're like, whoa, what am I supposed to do? And you won't be able to adapt. So yeah, you need a plan and the more detailed, and you need to put a lot of thinking into it, etc. But the more important thing is to actually get your feet wet and try it. So you've got a plan, it's more or less good, but you're the kind of person that can adapt to the changing the circumstances as you meet them. You learn along the way, and you're not so rigid that your plan isn't working, then you immediately give up, or your plan isn't working, you have to try and stick to the same plan. So these are the kinds of things. Whoa, I'm sorry, I just saw a coyote go by. These are the kinds of things that you learn when you're actually doing it. You learn that what's more important is that the moment you begin to make this business or write a book, believe me, I know all about that, things are going to change immediately. Your plans aren't going to be connecting exactly to reality. That's a key moment. How do you adapt to that? Are you flexible? Will you learn from that? You have to be able to learn from circumstances. You have to be able to learn from hardships, from obstacles. My former apprentice wrote a great book that I all recommend called The Obstacle is the Way, something I totally believe in. But the bad things that happen to you, the obstacles, the hardships, the resistance you get from people are exactly the way where you must move forward and learn from and advance from, because they're teaching you things and they're toughening you up as well. That was another part of that quote. So, sitting in your room and imagining a great business and never quite doing it, all of the powers that you have just kind of melt and dissolve. But doing something and facing failure and facing criticism, it toughens you up so that the next time you start something, you're not so weak. You're not somebody who's so insecure. You faced these things before. So we could go into the 20 different benefits that come from learning by doing, but those are some of them.
No, really powerful. And you mentioned adversity, and you mentioned challenge, and you mentioned 2008. And for me, 2008 was special because it was the year I graduated, but also I was going down a path that certainly wasn't for me. And I was going towards the financial market. I was on a train going to Wall Street. And it honestly took the crisis of 2008 to give myself permission and to be able to say, I'm not doing this. So I don't know if that doesn't happen, I could find myself 10 years down that road. We're now in a different crisis and a moment to breathe. A lot of people are now working from home. A lot of people maybe got laid off. A lot of people are creating some distance between the hustle of their lives and creating some perspective, Robert. So for somebody out there who's doing something, who's pursuing a job that doesn't bring them any engagement, that they're doing it because it sounds good at a cocktail party, because it sounds good to say that I'm on Wall Street working for, I don't even know who's around anymore, Citigroup, let's say. So many of them have dissolved. Or an engineer, or something that they have no real emotional engagement with. How can they use this time wisely to maybe have a course correction to bring them back to a place that's going to fundamentally change their life and their vocation and their engagement in both?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, there's several things. This is a time when you should really be turning inward and using it to reflect upon yourself and reflecting upon your future. So there are two kinds of people. There are people now who have a relatively good job, as you're talking about. They're a lawyer, or they're working on Wall Street, or they're engineering, but it's not quite what they want to do. Then there's the other people, vast majority of them, and I have a lot of empathy for them. They had a job, and now the job is gone, and they're unemployed. They're like the ground is lifted away from them, and they're just facing an abyss. In both cases, what will save you in the end is having some kind of long-term vision. And the problem that you have in life is you get locked into what I call tactical hell. You're locked in the present moment, and you're always reacting to things that are happening to you. So now you have the time to actually have some distance. Things aren't pressing you right now. You don't have to be at your job day in and day out. So you need to take a step back, and you need to listen to yourself. So in the first scenario, you're working on Wall Street, or you're a lawyer, or whatever, you need to listen to yourself. Now, maybe you do like the job, and maybe you love it. That's fine. I have nothing against that, because the most important thing is to feel a connection from within to what you're doing. But maybe you're not. And if you're not, your body, your psyche, your whole mentality is trying to tell you something. Your own kind of frustration, the fact that you don't feel creatively engaged with your work, is a sign that you were probably meant to do something else. So the first thing you have to do is go inward and say, am I happy with this? Is this engaging me? Can I see myself in 10 years following this path and feeling excited? Can I look at people at work who are 10 years older than me? Can I see myself wanting to be them? Oftentimes, no, I don't want to be that guy who's balding, who's drinking all the time, who's got all sorts of problems. I had different dreams when I was younger. So the first step is to understand that you're unhappy, because a lot of people never confront that. You have to confront your unhappiness and say, all right, so this doesn't suit me. Then you have to go through a process, and this is what this time at home can be extremely valuable. And I go through it in great detail in my book, Mastery, Chapter 1. I also talk about it in my new book, The Laws of Human Nature, in Chapter 13, I believe. You need to go through a process of what is it that you were meant to do in life. And I can't give you the complete answer here in 5 minutes, but it's really a question of connecting to something essential about yourself. And I maintain in the book that every human being, and this isn't some new age philosophy bullshit, every human being in the world is unique. There's going to never be another Tommy Baker. Your DNA is never going to be repeated in the history of the universe, which is a remarkable thing, because there are millions of components in those chromosomes that'll never be another Tommy Baker. And there'll never be another Tommy Baker who had the parents you had and the experiences you had as a child. So you're one of a kind. That's an incredibly powerful realization. And so the power that you have in life is to realize what makes you unique, what makes you different. If you follow what everybody else is doing, you lose that power. Look at everyone who's really successful. I mean, they're the vastly successful people like the Elon Musk or Steve Jobs back in the day, or Richard Branson, just to choose business examples. You can honestly say there is nobody else like them. They have their own style. Love it or hate it, they have their own style. They weren't afraid of what made them different. They followed their own path in life. And I talk about how in many of these cases, they knew when they were 5 or 6 years old that they wanted to do something. They had an experience. Steve Jobs passed by an electronics store in Sunnyvale, where he grew up, at the age of 6 years old. And he saw the electronics in the window, and he was dazzled by how beautiful they were. And he said, I want to be, that was his path. He wanted to be someone who wasn't just into electronics, but was designing beautiful products. You had experiences like that in your own childhood. You had moments of revelation, things that you were attracted to. It could be sports, it could be moving, just something very physical, or it could be mathematical patterns, or it could be music, or whatever it is. You had experiences like that, but you've lost it because you've been listening for so long to your parents, to your friends, to your teacher. You don't even know who you are. And now you have the time to sit there with a journal, to think back on your own childhood, to think back on your youth, to think about those things that excited you, that really got you, and what your dreams were when you were younger. I'm not talking about dreams of being a fireman or a policeman. I'm talking about something that was, I knew when I was 8 years old that I had a love of books and words that was just way too strong to deny, and it later turned into something. You have that. I swear you do. You're just not paying attention. This is the time to go into that process. And once you kind of have an inkling of it, and you probably do, although some people tell me that they have no idea, then you have to realize, depending on where you are in life, you can't make a 180-degree shift. You can't suddenly drop your job in Wall Street and write poetry, because you have to eat, you have to have clothes, you have to have an apartment, etc. You need to be able to make a living. So you need to make an adjustment to your life. This is where the long-term thinking comes in. You need to say, in 5 years, I'm going to segue into this direction that I want to have. And then in the meantime, I'm going to stick with a job. I'm going to make some money. I'm going to learn other skills. Maybe I go to night school. Maybe I learn things on the internet. Maybe I read books. Maybe in my spare time, I start trying these other things out. And you slowly make an adjustment. And for those who've had the rug swept from under them and they're facing that abyss, it's a similar thing. If you keep grabbing for a job just to pay your bills, which is understandable, you're going to be back in the situation in 2 years, because we're in a cycle right now in history. In capitalism, there's what is known as creative destruction. Every few years, whole industries are wiped out, right, because of the march of technology. And that creative destruction of capitalism is now at hyper speed. So you're probably latching onto an industry that won't last, that won't be here in a few years. You're an Uber driver. Maybe in 10 years, there'll be self-driving cars. There won't even be any Uber drivers anymore. I mean, that's a bad example. But so long-term thinking, having a plan, will relieve you of the anxiety that you feel about your future, and they will relieve your frustration and anger that you're carrying around by doing a job that you don't really love. I'm sorry about that long-winded answer, but
it's great. It's great. It's great. This podcast is about showcasing your mastery and your wisdom. So one of the things you spoke about was kind of that taking that inventory and asking questions and going inward. Do you feel that our obsession with distraction can sometimes be a feedback mechanism to avoid the clarity? Because if I'm on Wall Street, or if I'm living a life that is not compelling to me, there's some pain in there. And I know for myself, when I was actually doing that, I was the best. I knew all the statistics on fantasy football. I knew all the statistics on every single team and every single roster. And I consumed 10, 20 hours of football, basketball material. Nothing wrong with sports, but I knew so much, but I was so distracted because there was a pain inside of me, this yearning that I'm not doing the right thing. I'm on the wrong path. So can distraction be a feedback mechanism to avoid that inner clarity, Robert? Because it's one thing to have the clarity, but then it's one thing to move towards it, and moving towards it can be a painful process at times.
Well, I make the point in Mastery that to really be great at something is going to require work and effort. And we live in a culture that doesn't really want to emphasize that point, right? So there's the proverbial 10,000 hours. And in my book, I talk about the 20,000 hours that you'll need to become a master. We don't want to think that way. We want to think, I want a shortcut. I want an app that will get me there quickly. I want a drug I can take that'll get me there quickly. But there is no easy path. There is no shortcuts. So what you need to do in these situations is you need to redefine what you consider pleasure, which is an extremely important concept for a human being, right? How you define pleasure will determine the level of success that you will have in life. Because there's a famous expression, I believe it's in Buddhism, that we are naturally attracted to things that are pleasant, and we're repelled by things that are unpleasant. So you're not going to do something that you hate. You're not going to try something that feels repulsive to you, okay? But how do you define pleasure? And what happens, the danger in our culture, and you're talking about it, is a culture filled with distractions, is that it gets you habituated to the idea that pleasure must be immediate. You must get quick gratification. So my sense of pleasure is, I need to binge watch these TV shows. I need to watch, get something on Pornhub. I need to eat something right away that's going to fulfill my hunger. I need to, do something. I need to take this drug, or I need to drink, or whatever it is. So in 1 hour or in 15 minutes, I'll feel better because you're feeling empty or bored or whatever. And that becomes an addiction to you, becomes your famous feedback loop, and you can't get out of it. You send every time you're feeling any kind of emptiness, your only idea is, what can I get to quell that? Okay. And to be successful in life, you have to stretch out that pleasure principle. You have to think, what will give me pleasure? You can't change overnight. What will give me pleasure by tomorrow instead of in 1 hour? Well, maybe immersing myself in a book that is maybe entertaining and fun, but it's also a book. That will distract me, but it won't be such an immediate high. Then stretch it out to a month. Maybe I need to start build this idea that I'm thinking of. And, I don't care what it is, some project that you have, it's going to take you a month. And then that month, in putting it together, you feel pretty good. And it's a deeper pleasure than you get from the binge watching or reading the book. And then if you stretch that pleasure out to a year or 2 years, and you're starting a business, you're writing a book, you're making something, you're making a film, finishing it, completing it, is the ultimate form of happiness and pleasure that you can have in life. And that will get you out of that little rat's maze, that treadmill of always searching for immediate distractions, because you know that in 3 years you'll finish it. There is no greater feeling. And I know, I hate to be selfish because I'm a very lucky, fortunate person with my career path. But sometimes it takes me 4 or 5 years to write a book. And it's not fun. My last book was so stressful it gave me a stroke, which has kind of left my body crippled.
Glad you're healthy now.
I'm reasonably healthy. I'm on the path back. But it was a lot of pain. But man, finishing it, having it there on my shelf, talking to you, talking to other people about it, completing something that I've always wanted to write, is a form of pleasure that you can't possibly understand if you're solely tuned to things that are immediate. And the problem with the world we live in today is you're like swimming against the current to want to do that. The world we live in today is all about feeding you immediate stuff. You want junk food, go right outside your apartment and get it, or call DoorDash or whatever. It feeds the worst part of human nature, are the fact that we're lazy, that we want to take the path of least resistance. And you have to fight against that. The final thing I'll say is, if you want to get into shape, if you feel like you're physically tired and you're flabby and you don't like your body, you start working out. And when you start working out, it's not much fun. It's kind of a drag. You're kind of huffing and puffing. And, it's kind of boring at the gym. But then after a month, you start looking better, you start feeling better. Now you got to keep at it, right? Well, it's the same thing in anything in life. It's going to require effort, and the effort you put in has incredible rewards. So that's to me the most important way of getting out of that distraction trap that people have.
Yeah, really powerful. And like you said, it's a daily battle that we have to protect ourselves with. We have to set our own boundaries. Now, what you mentioned there, you're talking a lot about delaying gratification. What are some other tools? I know you have been doing meditation for about, I think, 8-10 years or so. What are some other tools that people can use, or that you've studied or used yourself or detailed in all of your works, to help kind of flex this muscle of, hey, I'm going to delay gratification. I'm going to feel an impulse right now to do something. I'm writing an article and I feel an impulse to check social media because I'm stuck. What are some practical ways in the day-to-day that people can start to flex that delayed gratification muscle? So maybe after 3 months, 6 months, or a year, it's their natural impulse is overridden much more quickly by this long-term, this long game that you're talking about here.
Well, you have to understand how the brain operates. So the brain doesn't change overnight. So if you're used to doing these distraction things, you're creating neural connections in the brain. You've been doing it for 5 years or whatever. And so it becomes a habit, it becomes an addiction, and your brain is constantly returning to that same neural pathway. So you need to form new neural pathways, and it's a slow process. It won't happen overnight. So you have to attune yourself to baby steps to understand that progress is slow. If you want to build your body up, you're not going to become Arnold Schwarzenegger overnight. It's going to take weeks and months. So you need to be able to slow yourself down, slow your impatience down, and to go, I need to take baby steps. So I don't know what your particular form of pleasure is, let's say, or your distraction. Let's say you're checking on your phone, you're checking your Instagram account every half hour and your Facebook account every half hour. And I don't know what else there is out there, TikTok, whatever,
Yeah.
All right. Don't suddenly go cold turkey and say, all right, I'm going to go a week without looking at them. You're just setting yourself up for failure. You're going to create frustration, and frustration and pain like that is only going to work against you. So tell yourself, all right, I check Instagram now, like every time it pings. All right, I'm going to try something where I'm going to wait. I'm going to check those accounts twice a day, this time and this time. Oh, that's kind of probably too much for people already. I understand. I'm going to only do it 3 times all right. And then you can slowly lengthen it out. Numbers are a great thing because they teach you. If you ever do weight training, which I've had to do now because my left side of my body is so weak, they teach you, my left arm was so weak that I could barely lift 3 pounds, just a press. Okay. But now after months, I know, okay, now I can go to 4. Now I go to 5. Now I go to 6. And now I'm up to 7. And now I'm up to 8, which is where I'm at now. But numbers are great because they show you your progress. So if you tell yourself, I'm going to check my Instagram account 4 times in a day instead of 10, all right, and you've done it, great. Now you feel like, okay, I overcame a little bit of impatience. Now next week I'm going to try it 3 times. Next month I'm going to try it 2 times. But I'm going to only check it once a day, kind of thing. Whatever works for you. So whatever is the problem or the distraction that you're leaning to, slowly wean yourself off and adapt the brain to taking longer spells in between all of these things that you're immediately grabbing for. That would be one of the main things. Meditation is a great tool because what you're trying to do is you're trying to slow the whole process down. You're trying to be able to be patient and to be able to learn and to be able to wait for things to happen and to be able to go through a sort of tedious process. And to take that ritual every day that I do almost over 40 minutes every morning. It just slows everything down and it tunes you to another pace. Because the pace of life is too fast for how the human body is naturally designed. And you need to be able to slow your own mental pace down. So those are some ideas.
Academy Nation, we'll be right back with that amazing conversation. But I got a question for you. What have you done in the last 48 hours to grow, to expand, to refine, or acquire a new skill? Remember, the time that we use now is going to matter once this is over. And if you don't have an answer for it, that's okay. But I want to share today's Academy sponsor, the incredible platform Skillshare. They offer thousands of classes for all types, from creative to entrepreneurs to learning illustration, photography, freelancing and productivity, and everything in between. And remember, right now is the time to learn new skills, to get lost in creativity, to grow, or to finish that project that's been on the back burner. I recently took a class on the platform by Greg McKeown. He is the author of the incredible book, Essentialism, and it is really poignant right now because of priorities, something that I teach. And the class is called Simple Productivity, How to Accomplish More with Less. I absolutely love that online learning is incredible right now. And my good friends at Skillshare want to hook you up on the Academy for listening, for being part of this experience. You can get 2 free months of premium membership. Yes, it's 2 free months of learning over at Skillshare.com/resistaverage. Skillshare.com/resistaverage. Use this time wisely, amplify your skills, and use the platform of Skillshare to get you there. Yeah, I love that. And just starting to flip that script a little bit. Otherwise, I know I've noticed with myself, otherwise these unconscious patterns just take over. I wanted to ask you about goals and long-term gratification. And let's say somebody has clarity around a project that they want to complete, or a vision, let's say even something grand, where they have a vision. You detail a lot of the stuff that's required for mastery in the book. Now, where's that law of diminishing returns, Robert? Like for example, with you in a book, I mean, 5 years, right? I assume there's times that you need to say you need to stop what you're doing and you need to go outside for a walk, or you need to take a whole week off, maybe, or you need to just change. You got to experience novelty, and I'm thinking like in the grander picture of someone's vision, finding this sweet spot between, hey, I'm obsessed with this, I can't not do it. I want to force things. I want to get there faster. I just I need to have that versus that kind of taking a step back and, hey, I'm going to detach. I'm going to let go for a little bit. I'm going to just create radical novelty to maybe get a creative breakthrough. I'm going to spend more time in meditation when I have a problem that I want to focus on. Like, how do we find that sweet spot in regards to our goals, whether it's a micro thing that we're finishing, that we're wanting to bring to life, or like a bigger life vision? Does that make sense, that question?
Yeah, sure it does.
Okay,
Well,
great.
it depends. These are great questions. They all make sense. Well, it depends on who you are, where you're at, and what you're doing. But once again, I return to understanding how the human brain operates. And so a big part of mastery, a chapter that I have, is on creativity, on the creative process, and what leads the human brain to becoming maximally creative. And I looked at all of the literature on it and examples of people who were incredibly creative. And there's a pattern that I lay out that is extremely common throughout history. And the pattern is, you have a particular project, okay? And as you go deeper into the project, it becomes more intense and you become obsessed. And you have a problem that arises that you need to solve. And that problem won't go away and you can't solve it, and you're banging your head against the wall. And you're so frustrated, and you're so angry, and you're so upset. And you think you're the biggest idiot that ever lived. You're going to walk away and you're going to give up. You say, all right, I'm through, I'm over, I can't do this anymore. And you give up. That next day, suddenly the solution, the idea comes to you. This story is over and over and over again. Albert Einstein, Louis Pasteur, great musical composers, writers, entrepreneurs, Henry Ford, Thomas Edison. The same thing over and over again. So there's the story of a composer, Brahms, and he couldn't figure out how to write this symphony. He was so angry. He said, I'm never going to compose. I'm giving up composing. I don't want to compose anything else. It's destroying me. And suddenly the next day, the music just poured out of him, and he wrote it all down, and it was his most brilliant symphony of all. So what happens is that the intensity of the project leads to a dead end. You're too tunnel focused, right? That you can't see the solution. Because the solution, you're going like this, and the solution will probably take you over there. But you're so obsessed and single-minded you can't see it. And then when you step back and you detach, suddenly it's, whoa, that's where I needed to go. Why couldn't I see that? But the lesson here isn't that you need to detach, is when do you detach? When do you let go? When do you too obsessed? You have to reach that point where the brain is inundated with information, inundated with ideas, and then unconsciously the solution is stirring in your brain. And the moment you step back and you relax and you go play golf or you go watch a game or you do whatever, suddenly it'll come to you. Now, it's not a simple formula. That idea might come to you a week later, might come to you a month later, but you don't want to detach too early. Frustration is a good thing. Being frustrated with an idea is a sign that you're in the right direction. The fact that you can't solve a problem, you're banging your head, is a sign that you're getting somewhere. And I tell this to people over and over again, because I do a lot of consulting. That frustration is often a sign. It's like the night is darkest just before dawn, is the expression. Your idea is the darkest just before you're about to have a breakthrough. So it's okay to feel frustrated with yourself and to think that you're an idiot, and because something great will probably come to you. But if you do detach too early on, if it's a month into the process and you're bored, you go, man, I'm sick of this. I'm going to go blah, blah, blah. Nothing will happen because you don't have enough intensity. Creativity and success in life is a function of intensity. The human brain was designed for intense focus. Focusing on something intensely you will not fail to have great results as long as it's something that excites you. So that's how we work. That's how we create the most interesting things. But it can also, as you say, lead to a dead end. And if once you let go and you take your foot off the pedal, something will come to you. But in mastery, I try and show you this is how the human brain works. You want to work with what we have and not try and attempt something that isn't in our power system.
And within that detachment, no matter if it's a micro or at a more macro level, there's an element of faith. There's an element of trust in there. Is that right?
Yep.
And so, that ability to because if we go back to external validation and instant gratification and all of that stuff, the moment that we detach, we're really detaching from the thing that has made us feel good, or even if it's a frustration, the thing that we've wanted to control. There's a vulnerable moment there. And so is that, I guess what I'm asking is faith and that trust also something that we can practice and cultivate in the micro, in our day-to-day, and then bigger term? You talked about the dark night of, I don't know if you said dark night of the soul, but you're talking about, the darkest night before the dawn. Even in personal crisis, often the same thing can happen. Our business experiences terrible cash flow for we're experiencing a big breakdown, and then we detach from the problem, and then we achieve a breakthrough. So let's pull on that string a little bit, if we could, on faith and trust and why those are also important.
Well, I have a story in Mastery about, I can't remember his name. It's Rodriguez. Jose Rodriguez. I can't remember his first name. Excuse me. I wrote the book. I don't even remember my own book.
Hey, you've written a lot of words.
He was the last Air Force pilot to be decorated with, I forget what the award is, an ace, etc. He flew planes in Desert Storm, a jet fighter pilot. And the title of the story that I have for him is called Trust the Process. And he was this short guy, Hispanic, maybe 5'6", a little bit on the chubby side. And he went to fighter pilot school in Alabama or somewhere. And he was surrounded by all these golden boys. And golden boys are just what you would imagine, like in the Tom Cruise movie, Top Gun. People who look like that, all handsome and young and confident and cocky and arrogant. Those were the fighter pilot images. And he wasn't like that at all. He was the total opposite. And they were so talented. They knew how to. And flying a jet fighter pilot is one of the most stressful things you can imagine. You're training on simulators, and you go in a plane, and it's like I've never done it, but he explained it's like physically nauseating. Things moving so much, and everything is happening so quickly. To maintain your composure is extremely difficult. And he was like, out of a class of 100, he was like in the 90 percentile. He was really far down, and he was getting frustrated. He was going, man, I don't know, I'm never going to make it. I'm not a golden boy. And then he remembered that when he was in high school, he played football. And he grew up, I think, in Puerto Rico, and he was the quarterback of the high school football team, 5'6" quarterback. It was really strange, but he was really good. They ran like a wishbone type thing. He was really good at that. And he remembered it. He had the same experience back then. There's a point to my story, so just be patient.
Of course. I'm enthralled, man.
He remembered when he was in high school, he had that same freak out. I can't possibly be a quarterback. There are these kids who are 6 foot, 6'2", more talented. Why me? And then he worked out. He did intense weight training. He practiced night and day with his father, etc. He turned himself into a great quarterback, or a good enough quarterback. And then he realized the process that got him there when he was younger. And if he could just do the same thing now with the jet fighter pilot school, he'll have the same results. He just realized that when he did that, and maybe when he did that in high school, it was either intuition or maybe his father pushed him, whatever, but he learned a valuable lesson, If you go through the process, you'll get there, right? So he goes, all right, I got to do the same thing here, okay? Because this is how the brain works. When you try something over and over and over again, it becomes easier. You don't freak out so much. Pathways are created in the brain. Things happen. And there's a process for how the brain is wired. So he spent extra hours with the simulator because his great thing was when he got in the plane, he lost all his composure. He wasn't ready and he was flunking. Spend more hours in the simulator so that when I get in the plane, I feel confident. He went through the process similar to working out in a weight room, and slowly he rose up until he ended up graduating like 5th out of 100 from where he was at 90. And he became, as I said, the last decorated ace in the United States Air Force, one of the greatest fighter pilots. He downed so many jets in the first Iraq War, and he described to me how incredibly intense that was. And so it was, he trusted the process from when he was younger. And so sometimes, if you've ever had an experience when you were younger, when you were a kid, where you had to learn a musical instrument, or you had to play a sport, or I don't care what it was, or it was mathematics or whatever, it's something you initially didn't really like, you kind of forced to do it. And then as you practiced, it got easier and it got better, and the light bulb goes on your mind. Oh, this isn't so bad. Maybe it is actually fun. Maybe the piano is fun. Maybe golf is an interesting game to me, blah, blah, blah. You learn when you're a kid that going through the process yields results. If you never went through that process, if you never had that experience, it's harder when you're an adult. So for all those parents out there, you want to get your children to be going through that same process. But if you know how the brain works, if you know that these pathways are being created and that how learning occurs, you won't fail to get there if you are steadfast, if you're resolute, if you're not weak, if you can take criticism, if you can keep persisting and persisting. The brain will take you there. So yes, it's all about trusting the process. I don't even remember what your question is anymore.
We hit it. No. About faith and trust, and beautifully detailed there with trust the process in that story. Your story, I think in a TED talk you said you had 40 to 50 jobs. You knew you wanted to be a writer, but you went all over the place. You went to Europe. You did all types of stuff. In an 18-minute TED talk or in a podcast, we can sum up a person's story so quickly in a Cliff Notes format that says, hey, Robert Greene knew that he wanted to be a writer at 8, and look at him now. Mastery. The guy wrote the book on mastery, and he is mastery. But that leaves so much of your process, speaking of process, out. The ups, the downs, the peaks, the valleys, the jagged edges, the questionings, the jobs that you didn't like, the things that didn't work. So I think it's really valuable for everybody, again, go in a social media age, it's very easy to compress people's stories into very specific linear paths. And then we get overwhelmed because, hey, if I'm 39 years old and I'm in a career that I don't like, and I go on social media and this guy's 7 years younger and he's already working at whatever magazine that I'm interested, or this person has this huge business, what's the point of starting? So basically the question that I'm going to is about comparison, and how do we look at somebody who's on some mountaintop and not get overwhelmed and start to think, what's the point? Robert's already doing it. This person's already doing it. I'm so far behind. I have none of the experience that they had. How do we gain that power back? Because to me, comparison is a way to leak our power, to leak our confidence, to let go of the clarity that we once had.
Well, it all comes back to knowing who you are. That is the first most important sign of wisdom. According to ancient Greece, it was the inscription on the Temple of Delphi, know thyself. So if you don't know who you are, then none of this will ever matter. You'll never get very far in life because you'll be doing what other people tell you to do. And so when it comes to comparing people, you lose yourself. You go, damn, I can't match what they're doing. That's because you're not supposed to be what they're doing. You're somebody different. You have your own path. your own way of going ahead. And so, it's a little bit weird to talk about myself in this because I had a fair amount of luck, and I don't know how much this translates. But I was 35, maybe, I think it was, when I met this man who was a book packager. Maybe he was 36, I can't remember. I was 36, sorry. Um, and up to that point, was totally lost in life. I could look right, if the time had been reversed, I could look at someone like Ryan Holiday, who's now got 7 bestsellers and he's 30 years old. I was 35, 36. I had nothing. I had worked at all these different jobs. I could have, and I was very depressed and, maybe even suicidal at some points. But I never gave up because I knew I had all this experience. I had learned so much. I could be a great writer if I found the right thing to write. And so when I met this man, he explained that he was interested in seeing if I had any ideas for a book. And I explained to him, I improvised what turned into the 48 Laws of Power. And he got very excited about it. I got, wow, this is what I was meant to do. Okay, so I never gave up. I understood that my path, now if I was 45 when that happened, it might have been a different story because there's a point where you do start giving up on yourself. But the key is, do you know who you are? Do you know what you were meant to do? Do you have a sense of what makes you unique and different? If you're at a turning point in life, you're 32 years old, you're frustrated with your job, you're seeing people who are much more successful than you are, take a step back and say, okay, maybe their success is a little bit of an illusion. Maybe they've had luck. Maybe you don't need to feel so envious. Maybe it won't last. But look at yourself and say, okay, I've had 7 different jobs in my 20s, and now I'm 32 and it hasn't added up to anything. But I've gained these skills, I've learned these things, I have these ideas. Something can come from it because I know what I was meant to do in life. I have this inner sense of that I was destined for something good. So I won't give up on myself. So your level of insecurity and your lack of confidence will destroy you in the comparison game. But your level of confidence in yourself, almost to the point of insanity, where I have a greatness in me, it's got to come out. When that comparison game comes in, you won't be crushed because you are equal to those other people. You have something worthwhile to communicate. It's just those kind of things have to be built up earlier in life. So in my 20s and 30s, I was learning a lot. I was doing different jobs that gave me a lot of skills. So I knew that something would happen. But if you never go through that process, if you waste your 20s and early 30s doing jobs that have no connection to you, doing things that don't add up to any kind of cohesive narrative, then you won't get to that point because you don't know who you are. You've not been putting together all the pieces of that puzzle that makes you who you are. So comparison is not a terrible thing if you have that inner strength and confidence, because it'll say, man, I want to be as good a writer as Malcolm Gladwell. He's great. I'm going to be as good as him because I know I can. All right, that's fine. Or, man, I could never be Malcolm Gladwell. Look at him. He's so smart. He's blah, 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 blah. Look at me, So it depends on where you are at that point, but it all comes back to know thyself, the inscription on the temple to Delphi.
So powerful, man. Thank you for that. Wow. So true. So true. I know we got the last couple of minutes. Is it ever somebody out there feels like it's too late? I mean, is it ever too late, or should they just start pulling on something, even if it's 3 hours a week during their downtime, instead of watching Netflix, go do something that they used to love? I mean, is it ever too late, or can we still make traction and wind up someplace that's engaging? And even if it's not something that we do full time, is it ever too late?
It's probably too late if you're about 90 years old.
Okay, so we're good.
That maybe then, but no, because we have incredibly elastic brains. You can keep learning things well into your 60s and 70s. There's a psychologist whose name I can't remember. My girlfriend always talks about him, who says your most creative time is in your 60s. That's a
Wow.
great thing to hear. I always thought it was in the 30s, but no, it's never too late. It's just different. So when you're 20, it's extremely, extremely important that you do these things that I'm talking about, that you build these habits that we've been discussing, that you go inside yourself and you learn what you're doing so that you can follow a reasonable path, go through an apprenticeship, and when you're in your 30s, great things will happen. But maybe that's not the path you took, and maybe you got lost along the way and you're in your 40s. Okay? But there was still some kind of dream that stays inside of you from when you were younger, something that you thought you wanted to do and you never could do it. Well, go back to that point. And as you say, maybe in your spare time, or maybe you can find a way. I had a story of a woman who was a lawyer and she was successful, but she hated it because it was just a way to make money. She'd always wanted to be a writer. So in her spare time, she started practicing her old writing, got really kind of was fun. And then she sort of realized, well, I'm getting better at the writing. I'm going to quit my job as a lawyer and I'm going to write articles about law. I'm going to write for law reviews, law magazines. It's not as exciting as writing a novel, but it's a hell of a lot better than pleading these really boring cases. Then I'll get to practice my writing. And it was the perfect segue in for her. And then slowly she developed her writing till she was making money. Now she is a writer. So there are ways, and she was in her late 30s, early 40s when she had this realization. So you can always find a different path, a different way. It's never good to give up on yourself. The thing is, the worst thing in life, I think, that can happen to anyone, it sounds very morbid, but you're like 70, 80 years old and you're on your deathbed and you're thinking, wow, man, I didn't do anything that I thought I was do when I was a kid. I didn't realize any of these projects. I was going to write these books. I was going to start this business. To me, that's the most miserable feeling you can have. You wasted your life. Because the way we humans are, when we're born into this world, no one gives us a direction. No one tells us this is what you were meant to do. But we crave direction. We crave some kind of meaning to our life, which is what religion used to give us. So the sense that you have no meaning, that your life had no meaning, no purpose, that it was wasted, is to me the worst emotion that a human being can feel. And I don't want you to have that emotion. So even if you're in your 50s and those little footsteps are creeping up on you from behind, you can still say, all right, maybe I could still write that book if I do this in my spare time. I remember, this is the last story I'm going to say because I'm boring people half to death with my story.
No way.
I was in New York. I was a young guy. I was maybe 22 years old. I was working in one of my 80 different jobs for a book publishing company. I was only there for like a month. There was this other woman there, an African American woman who was like 10 years older than me, I think maybe a little bit more. And she was an editor. She was a pretty good editor. And then I know that she had like 3 children. She was a single mother, and her house was in Connecticut, and the office was in Manhattan. So every day, the office closed at 6. She would do the 2-hour train ride home. She would cook and feed her children, and put them to sleep. And then starting at about midnight, she would start to write because she always wanted to be a writer. And I'm sorry, my story is a little confusing because she told me this story when I was in the office. It wasn't happening while I was there. She
Sure.
told me this story. But so she was about 32 when the story was going on. She would then at 12 o'clock when everyone was sleeping, she would start writing for 3 hours till 3 o'clock. Then she would get up at 7, feed her kids, get on the bus, the train to Manhattan, take her job. And the person who I'm talking about is Toni Morrison, the famous African-American novelist, one of the great American writers. And I thought to myself back then, if someone could overcome all of those obstacles, she had a job, she had to have a job to pay for her kids, but she really wanted to be a writer. She had to go travel 3 or 4 hours every day to commute. She had to spend all this time feeding her kids and taking care of them as best as she could. She had a caregiver during the day, but then she squeezed out 2 hours, 3 hours in the middle of the night. if someone like that could do it, what's to hold anybody back? It's because she wanted it badly enough. So if you wanted it badly enough, if you're in your 50s and that was your dream path, you can still squeeze out that time. It's, do you want it badly enough? My last
beautiful story. Desire. It's desire. It's that desire. It's very easy to live in excuses. But if the desire is there, we'll find the time at 3 a.m, 12 o'clock in the margins. We'll write when the kids are in the kitchen. It doesn't matter. But right now we have the time. So Academy Nation, I hope you listened to every word. I hope you took notes. Get all of his books, please. They are required reading on the path of self-growth, self-transformation, mastery, all the things that we talked about. Robert Greene, where's the best place for people to hear from you and get your books?
Well, they're all on Amazon if you want them, but I have a website that goes back a long time. It's based on my first three books. The website is Power, Seduction, and War. The and is spelled out. PowerSeductionAndWar.com. There you'll find links to my Facebook, to my Instagram, to my Twitter, to all that junk. And then there's a place where you can email me if you want your comments or your disagreements with me or whatever. An email address. And I'm not going to give you all of my Instagram accounts, but you can find it there on that one website. And there are also links for buying all of my books and links to my various interviews.
Thank you so much for your passion, your wisdom, and your integrity in living what you teach, Robert.
Thank you for having me, Tommy.
Wow, another awesome Resist Average Academy podcast. Thank you so much for being here. And it's Tommy, and I just wanted to say thank you. I know you have endless opportunities and endless choices when it comes to podcasts. And the fact that you chose the Academy tells me everything I need to know about who you are and what you're committed to creating in your life. If this resonated, I ask you take 60 to 90 seconds, go to iTunes on desktop or mobile, search the Resist Average Academy podcast, leave us a 5-star review. We are working hard to increase our exposure, and this is the #1 way that you can support the mission. So head over to iTunes now, take the 60 seconds, tag a friend when you resonate and connect with an episode. It would mean the world. I want to thank you for being on board on the Academy.